Welcome to the Indian Council of World Affairs, India's oldest foreign policy think tank.
Many people interested in foreign policy have told me when they come to the Indian Council of World Affairs in Sapru House, they feel a great sense of affinity with this institution because this was where the serious study of international relations in India all began.
The ICWA was set up by a small group of public intellectuals some years before our independence because they felt it important that India have an independent perspective on international affairs. Since then, the ICWA has gone from strength to strength, and it has been a long journey, almost 75 years. One particular milestone in that journey was in 2001, when the Indian Parliament passed an act declaring the ICWA to be an institution of national importance. We thus became a publicly funded independent think tank. Our governing council is headed by the Vice President of India, and the External Affairs Minister is its Vice President. We have three focus areas. The first is research, which is carried out by in-house faculty. Very rigorous research on different parts of the world, encompassing the domain of area studies.
The Council has been very proactive in conducting dialogue and discussion on African affairs and India-Africa relations in order to promote an understanding on African affairs in India, an Indian perspective on Africa, given the priority that now Africa has in Indian foreign policy.
Within the Council, we have a renewed focus on Latin America and the Caribbean region. So we're looking through our studies to find new areas of cooperation such as renewable energy, climate change and the space technology.
Interacting with leading experts, diplomats, media persons and academicians has helped me nurture my research further.
We recently had the ASEAN Indo-Pacific Outlook, which has a lot of convergence with the India's own Indo-Pacific construct.
The learning curve at the Council has been tremendous, and it provides a strong foundation for my future research.
The second is policy. Because we are a think tank, and being close to policy, commenting on policy, and helping formulate policy is an essential part of our functioning.
I think in the new age, what we're seeing much more of is that people want to be involved in foreign policy thinking. They want to have a voice. Now this is where ICWA comes in.
This is the platform where I for many years have come and interacted with the best in the world.
ICWA provides a valued platform for visiting foreign dignitaries to interact with informed Indian audiences. The third is outreach. This is most important because of our role as a public-funded independent think tank, and we carry this out by associating ourselves with as wide an audience in India as is possible. Colleges, universities, other think tanks, and of course with similar institutions elsewhere in the world.
What I would call the democratization of Indian foreign policy. That it has moved to distant corners of the country. It is no longer a preserve of Delhi.
ICWA has a robust publications program which includes papers by the in-house faculty, invited papers and commentaries, and books on foreign affairs by not only former diplomats and established academics but also by upcoming scholars. Our journal, India Quarterly, is being published since 1945. ICWA's publications are also being translated into various Indian languages. What is ICWA's role as we move into the future? The vision of the institution is to stay abreast of all the momentous changes taking place in the domain of foreign policy. New areas are emerging. There are strategic technologies, there is climate change, there is artificial intelligence, and there is cybersecurity. How can our research faculty and the audiences that come here be better informed about developments in these areas? How can we write and formulate research papers to give policy inputs that help in government policy formulation? These are the emerging challenges for ICWA and form a part of our vision for the future.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Indian Council of World Affairs, it is my absolute privilege to welcome you all to today's webinar. I am Anwesha Ghosh, a research fellow at the Council. As part of ICWA's efforts to bring to you important conversations on subjects that are of global importance, that India is watching very closely, today we have gathered to discuss the peace process in Afghanistan. Peace process referred broadly and loosely to a series of dialogue between the US government, the Taliban and the Afghan government, and the intra-Afghan negotiations that began in September 2020. In a few minutes, I will leave the floor to the panelists and request them to offer their remarks on the subject. But before I do that, I would just like to take a few minutes outlining the context and stakes for the issues at hand in this conversation. February 2021, this month, marks exactly 1 year since the US and the Taliban signed the agreement for bringing peace to Afghanistan in a bid to end decades of war in the country. Some of the most salient parts of that peace deal were, number one, the release of Taliban prisoners by the Afghan government and some Afghan government prisoners by the Taliban. Number two, peace talks between the two sides. Number three, ceasefire. Number four, for Taliban to cut off links with Al-Qaeda and other terror organizations. And number five, complete withdrawal of the US troops according to a certain timeline. While Kabul has largely kept its side of the bargain, the Taliban has not ended the violence. There is no ceasefire so far. According to US report, the group continues to maintain links with Al-Qaeda and other terror organizations. As far as the intra-Afghan negotiations are concerned, the first round of talks ended in December last year, with the two sides agreeing on the preliminary rules, and it was expected that the second round of talks, which began at the beginning of this year, would address the multitude of complex issues. However, for more than a month, the talks got suspended, although only at the beginning of this week, there were reports that the talks have been resumed. With the significant increase in violence, insecurity, and targeted killing in Afghanistan, and the slow pace of the intra-Afghan talks, the hopes were high in Afghanistan that the new US administration would take everything into account while deciding the US troop posture and US diplomatic strategy going forward. The Biden administration's intent to review the US-Taliban deal in order to assess how far the insurgent group has complied to the conditions of the agreement has been a significant development for the people of Afghanistan, who are keen on preserving the gains of the past 20 years. Kabul, New Delhi, and the rest of the world at large is watching the American drawdown from Afghanistan and the talks very closely. These developments not only will have impact on the political order inside Afghanistan, but also pose concerns for the regional stability at large. India and Afghanistan, of course, share deep cultural and historical ties. Their bilateral relations are forged by shared commitments to build democratic, inclusive, and an economically integrated Afghanistan. India has maintained cautious optimism about the accommodation of Taliban in the Afghan political order. India certainly is stepping up its effort to support Afghanistan at this very critical period of its transition. It was the first country to send coronavirus vaccines to Afghanistan. On 9 February, Indian Prime Minister and the President of Afghanistan held talks virtually and were part of a MOU signing ceremony for the construction of the Shatut Dam. It is important to remember that over the past 20 years, India has committed as much as $3 billion in terms of development assistance, infrastructure, democracy enhancement, capacity building, and education. In the last decade alone, over 65,000 Afghan students have passed out of Indian education institutions, and presently hundreds of students continue to study in India. We are absolutely thrilled to have 6 Afghan students among us to be part of today's panel discussion. I would like to note that their remarks today represent their own views and not that of the Council's. Today's webinar will commence with general perspectives on intra-Afghan negotiations and the current trends, conditions on ground, India's role, and key issues related to the peace process. And these perspectives will be provided by our esteemed chair, Ambassador Mukhopadhaya. His remarks would be followed by the remarks of Honorable His Excellency Mr. Tahir Qadiry. Mr. Qadiry's remarks will be followed by the remarks of the Honorable Representative of Afghan Civil Society, Ms. Mariam Safi, Director, DROPS. After their presentations, the Afghan students will give their presentation. and that would be followed by a question-answer session moderated by the chair. With these words, I would like to introduce today's speakers. Today's session will be chaired and moderated by Ambassador Gautam Mukhopadhaya. He served as India's ambassador to India's ambassador to Syria, Afghanistan, and Myanmar. He reopened the Indian embassy in Kabul in November 2001 as the Chargé d'Affaires after the ouster of Taliban from Afghanistan, and returned there as India's envoy in July 2010 and was there till May 2013. He is currently a senior visiting fellow at the Center for Policy Research, New Delhi. His Excellency Mr. Tahir Qadiry is presently the Chargé d'Affaires of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan to India. He is also the non-resident CDA of Afghanistan to Nepal, Bhutan, and Maldives. He is also the co-chairperson of the India-Afghanistan Foundation. Mr. Qadiry is an internationally recognized award-winning journalist with 18 years of experience across various fields of management, media, and public policy. At present, he is also a doctoral candidate at the Jindal Global University. Ms. Mariam Safi is the founding director of Organization for Peace Research and Development Studies, DROPS, Afghanistan. He is also an adjunct lecturer at the American University of Afghanistan, Kabul, where she teaches peace and conflict resolution. Ms. Safi brings with her over a decade of research and strategy building leadership experience, having worked with several international organizations. Ms. Safi designed and led the first comprehensive initiative by an Afghan think tank on the prospects of integrating Afghanistan into China's BRI initiative for Friedrich Ebert Stiftung. In 2018, Ms. Safi was invited by the United Nations Security Council to brief the security members on the situation on the role challenges faced by the women in Afghan peace process. Now coming to our young scholars from Afghanistan, Mr. Rustam Ali Seerat is a doctoral candidate at the Department of International Relations, South Asian University. His doctoral thesis is on external intervention and ethnic politics in post-2001 Afghanistan. Rustam is interested in identity politics and ethnic political representations. Rustam has contributed opinion pieces to various prestigious platforms, including Diplomat Magazine, Al Jazeera, Foreign Policy, and The Wire. Shukriya Yari, our next speaker, was born in Jagori district, Ghazni province, Afghanistan. She migrated to Pakistan as a child and returned to Afghanistan and then moved to India as a refugee. Shukriya studied international affairs at Jindal Global University. She has worked with UNHCR and Bosco, and currently she is pursuing her master's in diplomacy, law and business from Jindal Global University. Nawid Shirzai is presently doing his MTech at the Department of Civil Engineering at IIT Rookee, supported by ICCR. He holds a BTech degree in civil engineering from Herat University, Afghanistan. Previously, he has worked as a senior quality assurance engineer for the US Army Corps of Engineers in different provinces of Afghanistan. He was involved in infrastructural projects, including Afghan National Army compounds, Afghan National Police camps, power transmission lines, etc. Ms. Benafsha Attar could not join us, but we are very pleased to have Ms. Meena Nizami as a speaker today. Meena is a young mental health advocate from Afghanistan who is currently pursuing her final year BA honors degree in applied psychology from University of Delhi. Meena is the founder of Girl Up Afghanistan, an United Nations Foundation initiative working for the advancement of girls' skills, rights, and opportunities to be leaders. At present, she is conducting a research on impact of war on Afghan women's mental health and is interested in working towards the improvement of mental health care system in Afghanistan. The next speaker would be Asif Hamraz. Asif Hamraz is currently pursuing his master's in politics and public administration at the University of Pune with ICCR scholarship. Along with that, he's also working with the Ministry of Higher Education in Afghanistan. Hamraz has over 10 years of experience in social development sectors, having worked with various national and international organizations in the field of humanitarian support. Asif is currently the chairman of the Afghan Students Association in Pune. Abdul Hafiz Latifi is currently a doctoral candidate at the Department of Archaeology and Ancient History at the Maharaja Sayajirao University of Baroda. He holds a BA in Archaeology from Aristotle University, Greece. He did his master's from the Department of Ancient History, Culture and Archaeology at the University of Ahmedabad. Mr. Nadifi has worked as a curator at the National Museum of Afghanistan and is currently a member of Archaeological Institute of Afghanistan. Now some house rules for our audiences. Questions can be asked by logging into the chat box at the bottom of your page. Click on the guest option, type your name, accept the terms and conditions, join, and then you can join the discussion. With these words, I now hand over the proceedings to Ambassador Mukhopadhaya. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Anwesha Ghosh, for that very vivid introduction, and I'm delighted to find that a lot of our young student participants carry with them a considerable amount of experience. I would like to thank ICWA, the Indian Council of World Affairs, for this opportunity to moderate and chair this very important webinar. And I must say that I felt some special pleasure being invited to this one, because it's not very often that we hear young voices from Afghanistan, whether it is in the world at large or even in India. But I'm also happy to say that, I see faces here, for example, Rustam Ali Seerat. I've found that Afghan students in India are very active in the seminar circuit, in the webinar circuit nowadays, and I've heard at least some of you in some of the seminars that we have participated in. So a special warm welcome to our young participants. But let me also say, while I'm doing that, I'm really very pleased to see Mariam Safi amongst us, a civil society representative, highly accomplished, as you just described her, to this platform, speaking to I hope an Indian as well as an Afghan audience. You have already said, I think, all that needs to be said about her for the time being, so I won't repeat that. But let me actually begin. In fact, even before I say any substantive words, let me introduce our, I think, first speaker of the day, who is the Chargé the Affairs of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan in India, in Delhi, Ambassador Tahir Qadiry, who has had a very successful stint in Delhi, despite his young years. And I want to match the fact that, an important post like Delhi is being held by a young representative from Afghanistan, and I think he has brought a lot of that youth and vigor into Afghanistan's presence in India and Delhi, and particularly online and on media. So, I will reserve my comments or my substantive comments, because I think you've given a broad general briefing on the current state of the peace process. And really, we are here to listen to our Afghan guests and our Afghan friends, starting with Ambassador Tahir Qadiry, and then following with Mariam Safi, and then finally with, our young speakers. I also am aware that Ambassador Tahir Qadiry is in Kabul, and he has very limited time. So I'm very happy to invite him now to say his words and set the tone for this afternoon's webinar. Thank you, Ambassador Tahir Qadiry. You have the floor.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Gautam Saab. I'm audible, right?
Yes. Yes, sir. Yes,
you
are.
Okay. A very good afternoon from beautiful Kabul to all of you guys, to beautiful Delhi and those Afghan friends, perhaps in Afghanistan or across the world. I'm so happy, Ambassador Gautam, to be joining you from the beautiful Kabul, where I see the mountains from here, and I'm wearing, my Afghan attire. So, and I'm really sorry for being a little bit late, because I had to download it, and the internet is not really as fast as we have in Delhi. Thank you so much for today's webinar, really timely again. I've been here now for 3 days. Now, let me tell you guys about what is happening in Afghanistan, because whenever people came to Delhi to me and I would ask them, like, what is happening, then they would say, all right, by the time I left, this had happened. By the time I left, that had happened. So, because things are like changing quite rapidly here in Afghanistan, and of course for good developments and good things. So, I've been here now for 3 days in Kabul, and I've been meeting a lot of our senior officials, including His Excellency the President of Afghanistan this morning. I also had a meeting with His Excellency the Foreign Minister, with Dr. Soeb Abdullah, and few other Afghan officials. So now I have a little bit of good grasp of the situation being in Kabul. Ambassador Gautam, I mean, things
a little technical problem, I think.
Am I audible?
Yes. Now, please carry on. Oh.
Hello?
Ambassador, can we ask him to switch off the camera? Will that help?
Ambassador Qadri, would you mind switching off your camera because the network is poor? We are waiting for you to come back, but maybe without the camera it will be easier. Because this is very tantalizing. You just gave us the introduction and you were about to come to the main dish and then you disappeared. I think maybe we'll give him another 15 seconds and then perhaps give him an opportunity after Ms. Safi and before we come to the students. Ambassador Tahiri, in case you can hear us, we're giving you another 15 seconds in the hope that the technical problem is sorted out. If not, may we come back to you after Ms. Safi has spoken? Okay.
Hello?
Yes, now you're audible.
I'm really sorry. I'm really
No
sorry.
problem.
So this is
No
what
problem.
happens
We
when you're in
understand.
Afghanistan.
Please carry on.
Apart from we have got a lot of good stuff except good internet. So I'm sorry for that. So Ambassador Saab, a lot of good things happening here. I think one great stuff that the Afghan government has been able to achieve has been to forge a national, regional and international consensus when it comes to peace talks in Afghanistan. So as I'm just speaking, our foreign minister is in Russia as part of his regional tour to talk to the regional countries regarding, the peace talks in the Qatar. When you speak to people here, the level of violence has increased, unfortunately. So I've been speaking to a lot of my good friends from old days, to a lot of classmates, to a lot of family members. The Taliban have been resorting to some sort of, violence, which there have been, as a result, some targeted attacks of civilians and a lot of sticky bombs going around. But nevertheless, the good news is that life is going on, as usual in Afghanistan. Because Afghans have that resilience that despite all the odds, despite all the challenges, they're trying to live their life as if nothing is happening. Like last evening, I was invited over a cup of coffee in one of these newly built restaurants in Kabul. And I couldn't believe my eyes that, a lot of enthusiastic Afghans sitting together and having their usual chats and talking about here and there, and as if like nothing has happened. So that is the kind of life people are, having here in the country. Luckily, I'm sure you have seen that as part of the national consensus, we have been able to build, we the Afghan government have been able to build that kind of unity that everyone at least is on the same page when it comes to peace talks. So we want an enduring peace that can preserve the gains that we have made over the last 19 years. The Afghan women who are here prison, I think that is, a great achievement of what we cherish today of the post-Taliban era. A couple of months ago, when we had the latest elections, a generation for the first time went to the ballot to vote. So this would have not happened under the Taliban period, because I mean I was living at that time, and we didn't even know the concept of elections. So women's rights, human rights, freedom of expression. Ambassador Saib, in fact, I just came from Tulu News, so I had a sit-down interview with one of the leading channels in Afghanistan. When I was getting out of there, let me just picturize what was happening. The Afghan famous singer Ariana Saheed was standing outside on the road, taking pictures with Afghan girls and boys. So we have got an equivalent of American Idol or Saregama program of India, which we call it Afghanistan. So this was another picture of what other people outside the world don't see that. And in fact, I stayed there for 10 minutes just looking at the enthusiastic young Afghans, rushing towards the star, taking pictures with her while the normal life is going on. So, I mean, these are those great values that we cherish today of having them. So that's why the Afghan government has been firmly standing to preserve all these values and all these gains and strides that we have made over the last 19 years. That's why, the main point and the main stance of the Afghan government from the beginning has been that we will give concessions, but as for us, these rights and these principles, these democratic values are preserved. So I think, it's quite clear for everyone that, we will go ahead, but, with the only condition that these have to be preserved. Apart from that, with the region, I think we have had some great achievements as well as part of the regional tour of His Excellency Foreign Minister, other senior Afghan officials that they have been traveling around, including India. And now we see that we have forged that kind of a stance, united stance, where everyone really believes that, yes, we want peace in Afghanistan, but it has to be a dignified peace. It has to guarantee that Afghanistan will not get back into, the Taliban era. So as part of that, of course, I thank India as always for standing by the Afghan people, for having those, shared democratic values that we have. So that's why we are on the same page, in fact. And we are on the same page with many of these regional countries when it comes to peace talks. At an international level, I'm sure the great panelists and also the audience know that as part of that, during the very first days of the Biden administration, there were a couple of contacts meeting between the Excellency, the President of Afghanistan, the Foreign Minister of Foreign Secretary of the United States, the NSA, our NSA. And as part of that, I think there were some really good signals, and which actually give three things to us, which show us three things. Number one, commitment of the international community to Afghanistan, that yes, the whole world, they want a peace in Afghanistan, but, on the condition, it's condition based. Review of the agreement between the Taliban and the United States has been, another of those things. And, supporting a regional consensus idea and concept, which you have all these regional countries, because as we have always said, that peace in Afghanistan is peace in the region. Peace in Afghanistan will ensure prosperity and, the progress of the region. So that's why we need to have, the support of all these countries. So we have been able to do that. We are moving towards a good direction. The Afghan government has delivered, Ambassador Saib, when it comes to all the conditions that the Taliban had put. So we have delivered them. Our negotiating team is in Qatar. And we have got 4 very strong and powerful women representing the Afghan women who are speaking head-on with the Taliban. So I think while we do know that there might be challenges ahead of us, but nevertheless, I think there is light at the end of the tunnel. I think ultimately one of the main conditions for the Taliban is actually to stop targeting the civilians, stop targeting the targeted killings of the Afghans, because only then you can move ahead, and make peace. But being here in Kabul, I don't know. When I was in Delhi 3 days ago, perhaps I had a different idea, but now coming back to Afghanistan, I see all this, enthusiasm going around me, life going around me. It gives me the hope that, Afghans are united. Afghans are looking forward. They will never get back. There will never be any reverse in terms of situation or the gains that they have made. And I think to conclude, what I want to say is on a positive note is that a lot of opportunities are there. The NATO, I'm sure our audience knows that NATO quite recently they also supported the idea of an enduring peace, and many of these countries have already been throwing their support behind the Afghan government and the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, which is the red line for Afghans. So to conclude it on a positive note, I think the way ahead, we see some light in at the end of the tunnel, and I think together and with unity, with solidarity, we can move ahead. And we can even make peace by preserving all the gains that we have made so far. Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you, Ambassador Tahir Qadri. I think you've given us a very, fine update of the situation as it is currently in Kabul. And let me just highlight a couple of points. I think the first, the atmosphere of insecurity. We sincerely and very deeply are concerned about the levels of violence, the levels of targeted killings, the continuation of terrorism in one form or the other. And I think you emphasized the point that I think when the talks start, perhaps one of the key issues that will be red-lighted or highlighted right in the beginning will be this issue of a ceasefire while the talks are going on, not at the end of the talks. And if not a full ceasefire, then at least a reduction in violence. And as you all know, one of the elements of the US Taliban deal was that there would be a reduction in violence and there would be all kinds of restrictions on violence, but mostly to do with the international troop presence, not so much to do with the Afghans. So Afghans have still been, victims of continued violence during this period. And in fact, as you pointed out, it has risen during this period. I think the second very important point was the atmosphere of resilience, and I think you even added an element of optimism, resilience that I have personally seen. When I first reopened the Indian embassy after the Taliban period in November 2001, Afghanistan had been through, a decade of Soviet intervention, and then subsequently the Mujahideen fighting civil fighting that happened immediately after that. And then really 5 to 6 years of really miserable Taliban rule with very little economic activity. But even then, I found the spirit of the Afghan people unaffected. And the generosity of the Afghan people, even in the midst of that situation, is something that I cannot forget. And I'm glad that the third point, which is that a general sort of consensus within the Afghan political establishment and also a new awakening amongst the international community that the gains of the last 20 years, and particularly the gains that we have seen youth coming out, and we have seen women, coming into positions of, work as well as in administration and governance and so on. These gains will not be sacrificed, and this has been something that will remain a very important part of the negotiations, and that the Taliban will have to, at some stage, accept that the people of Afghanistan, standing by the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, do not want to see a reversal of the gains of the last 20 years. Thank you also for, giving us a little taste of the atmosphere and of the diplomatic efforts, both international and regional. A little update on the possible review of the US Taliban deal, or the review that the new Biden administration is undertaking about how to proceed ahead on the peace talks and beyond, and also on the regional initiatives that have been taking place. Dr. Ghosh has already sort of informed us about the kind of cautious optimism that the government is viewing the talks with, and there should be no doubt that India would support both peace and particularly a good faith peace negotiation and a power sharing agreement that ends the current conflict and ends also the levels of violence that daily the Afghan people are having to struggle. So with those words, let me invite Dr. Mariam Safi to give her words. She's speaking also from Kabul, I understand, and then we will come to our student speakers for the day. Dr. Safi, may I invite you?
Ambassador Gautam Mukhopadhaya, thank you so much for that. I'm sorry, I'm not going to turn on my camera because the bandwidth might cause a bit of a problem. So I'd just like to say a very good afternoon to yourself, to His Excellency Ambassador Tahir Qadiry, and to all of our colleagues at the World Affairs, at the Indian Council of World Affairs, and all the students who have joined us today. It is a great privilege for me in particular to be speaking at this platform. With whom will rest this eventual and hopeful political settlement. I'd like to note that today in my participation, I'll be speaking in my personal capacity as a member of the Afghan civil society, but not as a representative of the civil society community in Afghanistan. That privilege I do not have. And I'd like to thank Ambassador Qadiry for his remarks. I'm very happy that he was able to show to you all the positives that still exists in Afghan society, the hopefulness, the resilience, and that is very much a part of Afghan society, even today, amidst everything that Afghan society is facing today, with the uncertainty around the peace process and rising violence. They are certainly doing their very best to keep faith in a better future. The points that I'll be sharing with you today are informed by my work at the Organization for Policy Research and Development Studies, as well as findings from the Afghanistan Mechanism for Inclusive Peace, which DROPS is a co-founder of. And these are consultations that both have held with 1.5 and Track 2 civil society community and the research community here in Afghanistan. To begin with, I'm going to talk a little bit about where we are right now with the current process. Then I'll move on to how we got here and where I think we're heading sort of in the future. But I'll be talking strictly from the perspective of our research, but also as a member of civil society viewing this process. Now, the peace negotiations, which began on the 12th of September, have now resulted after 6 months, a little over 6 months, in the rules of procedure for intra-Afghan talks. Some say it took a long time to get to this point, but if we look at other peace processes around the world, just getting to rules and procedures tends to take a very, very long time. So I think that getting to this point has been a good step and a positive step in this process. The rules and procedures that were devised have been agreed upon by both parties to guide the negotiations as they commence. And as Ambassador Qadiry mentioned, we're seeing positive signs from Doha that both sides are going to now sit and have designated particular committees to start talking. Now, the two agendas that we hear that might be likely up for discussions as the negotiations begin are the type of governance structure that may or come about, and a permanent ceasefire. There may be others. These are the two that we hear of quite often being agendas. Now, any discussion around these issues, or any other issues for that matter, will inevitably be tied up within the Taliban-US agreement and its future, which the Biden administration is, of course, reviewing. And the role played by regional actors is quite crucial as well in the process. Since 2018, as the peace process gained momentum with the involvement of Ambassador Khalizad's reconciliation team and the subsequent recognition of the Taliban as a legitimate political group, the process was viewed at that time as largely excluding the Afghan state and the voices of civil society actors, a sentiment that was shared upon the signing of the US-Taliban agreement last year in February. The Afghan government criticized the US-led efforts to negotiate a political settlement and viewed it as a betrayal that delegitimized Kabul. Yet, embroiled in political fractures at the time and unable to establish a national consensus with disenfranchised political groups and the general public, led the government to falter in plugging the widening gap between itself and the public. On the other hand, civil society actors cautioned against an agreement that neglected to highlight their concerns and excluded their demands, namely those demands being the protection of the Constitution and the gains of the last 2 decades, since they felt that the US had long been a partner of theirs in the state-building process, and thus felt abandoned. Alternatively, the Taliban treated the signing of the deal as a victory, even though its leadership cautioned against such statements, as they recognized that it could cause disruptions in the next phase of the process, in particular the withdrawal of foreign forces in the coming 14 months, which was conditioned on 2 points made in the deal, which included the starting of intra-Afghan talks and then discussions around a permanent ceasefire. Such caution was also made by Ambassador Khalilzad towards the Taliban when he stated that nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. Thus, while the Taliban should have then acted accordingly, this is not exactly what we witnessed happening. Instead, reports show that the Taliban have yet to disavow Al-Qaeda. The UN too has reported that the Taliban are escalating attacks against the Afghan National Security Forces and civilians, and targeted attacks against civil society actors, including religious scholars, women, and journalists, increase to what has been unprecedented levels. To this, the Taliban have stated that they have not been behind such attacks. However, looking at the US-Taliban agreement and the increase in violence and the limited actions taken to reduce violence, it makes it difficult to discern. The process last year appeared to be driven by a political deadline in the US, and intra-Afghan talks coincided with US elections. And the goal of withdrawal by the Trump administration, all of this sort of combined to create this political expediency, which was not conducive to dialogue for true inclusivity in Afghan ownership. The release of 5,000 prisoners is a case in point. This action actually decreased the government's leverage on the negotiation table, and it also eroded public trust in the process. Many state that this was not a commitment in the US-Taliban agreement, yet afterwards the Taliban negotiation team statements that the release of such prisoners would be a condition for them to sit on the negotiation table, and then following with heightened attacks within Afghanistan and also mounting US pressure led to this eventual result. Now, leverage should be equal for all parties to the table, but the political expediency tilted the process in favor of the Taliban, while putting the Afghan state in an existential disadvantage. For most of 2020, analysts and civil society members continue to caution international stakeholders that doing more of the same would not lead to different results, and that the process at the time was still doing much of that. This was underscored in January by John Kirby, Pentagon spokesperson, a statement which was later endorsed by the new Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, and where he said that the Taliban have not met their commitments. Without them meeting their commitments to renounce terrorism and to stop violent attacks on the Afghan National Security Forces, by dint that of the Afghan people, it's very hard for a negotiated settlement. Now, this is just this January of 2021. Now, I want to make clear, just as Ambassador Qadiry mentioned, that Afghans were and continue to be ready for peace. I also want to make clear that that Afghans are not asking for a continued or overdrawn US-NATO military engagement. They were and they continue to simply ask for A, the Taliban to meet their commitments in the US-Taliban agreement, and B, a little bit time to ensure that the process moves beyond the 5% who are represented in this process to the 95% who actually make up the country. And Afghan youth are the largest segment of this population. To this end, Afghans demand that the process be inclusive and for Afghans to feel that this process is for them. That is the only way that they can gain a sense of local ownership and be prepared and equipped to lead this process after international partners and their mission in Afghanistan. With the new U.S. administration led by President Biden, a slight sense of cautious optimism has risen that perhaps now the U.S. will take a more balanced approach towards both parties, and that a slowing down of troop withdrawal aligned to conditions on the ground would be able to reduce this leverage that the Taliban have thus far enjoyed under the previous U.S. administration. Meanwhile, it could also give the Afghan public and civil society actors needed time to shape a better next chapter where Afghans can take the lead in shaping their country. Now, how can Afghans, our youth, our civil society actors do this? Very quickly, I'll just state that civil society actors, women's groups, youth, tribal elders, religious scholars in Afghanistan have repeatedly voiced their concerns and demands. This is already out there. These can be found in the various declarations produced by civil society actors, in addition to those that have already evolved from the various national jirgas that have been held from 2018 to 2020. And you can compare the two. You won't see huge divergences in views and perspectives. In particular, through our efforts, we have held several consultations this past year with actors in Track 2 and also in Track 3. This included women and youth as a cross-cutting demographic. Now, as part of these efforts, the findings from these consultations show that a wide sector of Afghan society want largely the same things from this process. I'm going to just highlight what some of those are. As regards to the process in the peace talks, civil society actors have requested, 1, that the process designed should address the use of violence for political ends through a feasible ceasefire, monitoring and verification measures that actively manage, reduce, and bring a permanent end to the use of violence by conflicting parties. 2, recognize as a matter of principle, fact, and best practices that the most sustainable peace settlements are those that are inclusive, involving all segments of society. 3rd, provide for the establishment of a culture of peacemaking, social justice and equality, and an end to impunity in Afghanistan that broadens the space for citizen participation and engagement, that allows for the inputting of direct and digital submissions into the dialogue process by Afghan stakeholders, whether through civil society or Track 1 mediators assigned to facilitate the process. 4th, ensure meaningful representation of women, youth, war victims, vulnerable people, ethnic and religious minorities, tribal, religious, and marginalized voices within the dialogue process through direct representations to the negotiation table, thematic working groups, victims' testimony, the appointment of women, youth, victims, and other ambassadors, or the creation of specialized advisory boards. 5th, commit to identify and deploy an appropriate process for addressing the past and current grievances and injustices perpetrated against victims during the conflict, to ensure they are not repeated by adopting transitional justice and counter-impunity measures. 6th, empower civil society to support the negotiation process through advocacy, observation, surveys, audit, communication, knowledge transfer, and monitoring mechanisms. In addition, civil society to be given a role to even help mediate among the parties to the conflict. 7th, ensure that the peace process and negotiations are fully transparent and people are aware of issues being discussed or decisions being made during the negotiations. In conclusion, I'd like to state that the Afghan people, its youth, and all segments of civil society need the support of its international partners, in addition to those by the negotiating parties, and in particular its regional neighbors, such as India, which have made such heavy investments in the development sector of Afghanistan, and then supporting its youth and its next generation in education opportunities, private sector investment, and so on, to help in echoing the demands that the Afghan people are making. And that is to be given the time to build the mechanisms and modalities that they require for sustainable peace, so we don't end up in a more difficult situation that we currently are in. Most importantly, we need to instill checks and balances in this process, whether it be during a ceasefire, changes to the constitution, or implementation of post-agreement. In all of these areas, both national and international, and in particular regional stakeholders, can play a huge and remarkable contribution. And those are quite important. And building a consensus to be able to do this regionally is both inevitable for the longevity of any agreement to come about, but of course its success also. And so I would like to just end there, and I'd be more than happy to take any questions. And I must say that I'm very much looking forward to the interventions of the young Afghan students who will be speaking later on. Thank you so much, Ambassador.
Thank you so much, Dr. Safi. I think, really, it's a pleasure to have had you here. I think that was an absolutely comprehensive kind of briefing on the current state and also the future prospects of the peace process. And I think it would be unfair of me to even try and summarize the richness of that presentation. But I think 2 points really stand out. One is, the sort of sense and the demand of people in general. I think as civil society representatives you represent, is for an inclusive peace process, number one. And number two, a little more time, as well as, a kind of attention to the conditions for the peace process to unfold, so that there is greater time for public consultation and all the other issues that you raised. In particular, the inclusion of what would otherwise be called various disadvantaged groups. Now, I think you have set the template for young students and young but very experienced students who are present here to speak. Many of them have work experience, some of them have a lot of academic experience as well. And I see that there is a fair amount of, gender balance, as well as a kind of age balance amongst the students itself. And here I would like to just say something that I observed since the time I was there in Afghanistan. In fact, I've been in Afghanistan at 3 different stages of my life. First, as a student traveling through Afghanistan before the Soviet intervention in 1977, when Afghanistan was a very open and, where international tourists and travelers used to crisscross Afghanistan by buses from Europe to Asia and back. And I happened to be one of those tourists and travelers at that time. Second time, of course, was immediately after the fall of the Taliban, which has been mentioned earlier. And then, of course, when I was ambassador between 2010 and 13. One thing I remember, and Dr. Safi, I'm sure you would be part of that, was the emergence of the Afghanistan 1400 group of youth activists who came, to the scene around 2012, 2013. And what used to often strike me in those days was how youth had virtually no voice in Afghan society, a patriarchal society where, apart from, a male dominance, there was also a kind of very high regard and respect for age. And it was very uncommon to be able to see young people to speak up and, make their voice heard in the company of elders. In the years since then, that means since about 2012, 13 to 20, we have seen a complete sea change in the expression of youth and their appearance all across the political spectrum, the administrative spectrum. And I think the fact that many Afghan students have had education during this period, both inside Afghanistan as well as outside, and India, you mentioned, was one of them. One of the countries where they have, they have gained in this education. I think these have all been factors that have helped. And I think these have all been factors that have contributed to a greater and greater democratization of Afghan society. Something that perhaps the Taliban do not fully realize and appreciate, because in many ways, they still carry the baggage of that patriarchal society that we are talking about. And it is my conviction that Afghanistan has changed a lot in these 20 years. An entirely new generation has grown up. There has been a much greater urbanization during this period. So, urban centers are much more, the population density has grown a lot. They have been exposed to the world. They've been exposed to freedom of speech, freedom of the media. They've been exposed to the experiences of the other parts of the world as well. They have gained a lot. They have soaked a lot. Like Afghan students in India have seen, society in India function. Students abroad in Europe have seen how they work, and students in the United States too have learned how they work. A lot of experience has come about by partnerships. I think one of our participants has actually worked with the United States presence in Afghanistan. So there have been a lot of partnerships, civil society partnerships, government partnerships, academic partnerships, like the American University of Afghanistan, where you are an adjunct professor. So there is a great deal of exposure, and this Afghanistan is not the Afghanistan of 1992, 96, and even up to 2001. And this is something that has to be realized. So, having with those remarks, I really actually don't want to come in the way at all of our principal guests this afternoon and the whole purpose of this event, which was to hear young voices of Afghanistan on the Afghan peace process. My only guidance to you would be to speak frankly and fearlessly. We are here in support of the Afghan people. We are here to support the gains of the last 20 years. We are here to support a peace process that will yield a genuine and good outcome, a just peace, as someone talked about it. We recognize that the peace process so far has been inherently unequal, a fact that you described in the legitimization of the Taliban and the delegitimization of the government over a long period over this period of negotiations. A delegitimization and a legitimization that has actually skewed the balance, both in the battlefield as well as in the diplomatic table. And one of the things that I think we need to see is how this peace process can be used to restore that balance. One of the conditions for a successful peace process is both sides must want peace. What we see is that while Afghan government, Afghan civil society, Afghan youth, all Afghans want peace, we are not sure that the Taliban want peace. They see this as a victory, and there is this doubt in a lot of people's minds that perhaps victory is what they eventually want. And a final word, because I don't think we can completely miss out this element. We know that regional actors are also involved in Afghanistan in different ways. We would be very interested in your views on how different regional countries, as well as the international other major players, view this peace process, and what is their role in the peace process. Who are the spoilers, and what way are they spoiling? And I don't think I need to be shy about mentioning in particular the role of Pakistan, where the Taliban continue to have safe havens and shelter, and where the Pakistani agencies are still involved in tutelage, guidance, and support for violence in one form or the other. So with those words, I'm just going to see exactly where we are on in the process. I think we were supposed to start our discussion with the students at about 3:47. I regret that I think we have slipped a little. Nevertheless, we will give all the students their appointed 8 minutes of time. And I will just give a very gentle reminder in case someone is exceeding and does not look like he or she is about to finish. So let me call our first speaker of the day, of the afternoon, Dr. Rustam Seerat, PhD scholar at the South Asian University, who I've heard before in other fora as well. Mr. Seerat, you have.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, and it's very and thank you for the opportunity here. So I will start from what Afghanistan people want, whether they want peace with the Taliban or not. The problem for that we have never asked them that what they want for a group which they have been fighting for the last 20 years, what their views are on them. So far no survey has been done, no widespread inclusive survey or referendum has been taken to ask whether people in Afghanistan want to make peace with the Taliban or not. So any generalization on that area would be problematic because we don't know that. And we also don't know that, if they want peace with the Taliban, to what extent they are willing to compromise, whether they are willing to accept the Taliban's regimes of rule and their ideology or not. So we don't know that, and to what extent people and how much of Taliban's ideology are acceptable to the Afghanistan people, we don't know that. So on that area, I would say we should be cautious. And another point would be that currently we define peace in a very narrow term. It means that, when we talk of peace, is that there is a talk in Doha, and there might be a government and Taliban agreement and end of violence. That's the definition of peace right now that we have, which is, I think, it's a very narrow understanding of peace. Because if in some form Taliban comes to join the government, they have to make peace with the larger population of the country, which they have for the last more than 20 years have suppressed, killed and harmed. So they have to make some reconciliation with the people also. On the government side also, we know that in those areas which the Taliban were there and the government military attacked those areas, civilians have been killed. So for that, in those areas, governments also need to reconcile with the people of that area, of those areas, southern and eastern part of the country. So these are the problem which we are not talking right now in this peace process. Also about transitional justice, which is crucial. Ms. Safi talked a little about that, but what we know that transitional justice after the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan and the communist rule in the country did not happen. And that gave a sense of impunity to the upcoming perpetrators of violence during civil war, and after that even the Taliban. Now they are not talking about that, what their views on victims and all. So transitional justice, at least this time, should not be compromised or forgotten. There should be some showing remorse and then maybe apologizing and all, which has its precedent. Abdurrashid Dostum in 2015, he actually apologized to the people of Afghanistan for his role in civil wars, and that was the only example. And I think that's the least measure of transitional justice which could be done, and some Afghanistan people deserve an apology for all they have done to them. Now I will come to the challenge of this peace, which will Taliban spokesperson said yesterday that they will soon start. So here the first challenge is that, as you also mentioned, that the Talibans are not very keen on making peace. For them, it seems that the peace talks seems to be a tactical measure to keep the US out of the war, and then they themselves continue their fight. That's what happened since 29th February when the US Taliban deal was signed. So that's the first challenge. The second challenge is that given the nature of this long-standing conflict, any peace settlement with the Taliban would be precarious and likely to collapse. So we should keep our hope very low on that front, that an agreement will not necessarily end violence in the country. So, and the challenge which extends from here is we don't have a third party to negotiate, to middle between the Afghanistan government and the Taliban. In the case of Nepal, which is close to our South Asia, UN played a very crucial role in integrating Maoist fighters in the Nepali army. But in case of Afghanistan, we don't have that UN role. Compared to Maoist fighters, the number of Taliban fighters are way more than that. At least they claim to have 100,000 fighters. In the case of Nepal, they were around 10,000. So on the ideological front, the Taliban has not changed any components of their ideology. They are adamant on their Islamic Emirate, which is, that's maybe the most crucial issue which we have to talk about that. On the issues of women, Taliban recently in their letter to the US people, the Taliban political deputy, he wrote that we want to guarantee women's rights within the Islamic law. So when it comes about Islamic law, there is lots of interpretation of that, and Taliban are known to hold the most strict interpretation of Islamic law. So, and it keeps actually open for them to feel free to impose any form of ideology they want. When it comes about Shia Hazara, which were their main victims, which faced their massacre twice or thrice in 1990s, the Taliban have not changed their views a little bit even. In the first phase of negotiation, the Taliban did not talk about the Shia Hazara. They said, we will talk about it later. This was a very unfortunate reminder for the Shia Hazara, which happened when in 1990s, after the Najib government fell. In Pakistan, when the Mujahideen government was formed, the Mujahideen government also did the same. They said, we will talk about Shia Hazara later. And that we saw, ended up in civil war in Kabul. The Taliban also doing the same thing. So that's on the Shia Hazara front, which the Taliban have not talked.
Yeah, Mr. Seerat, that's 1 minute, please.
Okay. So then I will come directly to the rule of what India and Afghanistan can do together. So my first suggestion would be that India should increase and continue its scholarships to Afghanistan, because it is very crucial for developing human resource in Afghanistan. That should be. And the second point, that India should lead should increase the expand of SAARC. South Asian regionalism. India should take a leading role in that. As the biggest country of the region, it should facilitate intra-regional trades, maybe visa-free South Asia, and all these are very crucial, I think, for our integration of the region. Because I think Afghanistan has a future in this. If our region is integrated, we have products in Afghanistan that could be shipped to Delhi very easily. Like, for example, let me give you an example of watermelon in Afghanistan, which is very cheap during summer. In Delhi, that's very expensive. I mean, there are farmer issues in India and all, but it would be helpful for economies of both the countries. And the same thing also about products like banana in India, which in Afghanistan is very expensive. So if there are some trains which travel between Delhi and Kabul in the future, I mean, this will be very good for the benefit of both countries. So, and I end there. Yeah. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you very much, Mr. Seerat. I think that was a very sober assessment of the situation, as well as very concrete, clear, and practical observations, as well as recommendations. And I'd just like to pick one or two points, I think, for our discussion. And in case there's something that you left out, feel free in the discussion to. One is, I think, this whole question about a UN mission, whether there is scope, in fact, to change the format and the template of the negotiations from essentially what is a US-led or perhaps a NATO-supported kind of mission to a UN-led mission. In other words, much more internationally inclusive. So this is one question that I think is something that we may like to think about. It's a relatively new idea. Not much has been expressed on this, but I do notice that the Afghanistan Institute of Strategic Studies also has raised this issue very recently. I think the second point is about this whole issue of regional integration. Again, you did very well to bring in the possibilities of SARC in regional integration. Of course, you know that the big obstacle here is the whole issue of transit through Afghanistan. But there is still a possibility that, while we have been promoting these flights from Afghanistan to India and vice versa for Afghan products for the Indian market, the question is whether or not India could take some kind of initiative in actually investing in the agricultural and mineral resources of Afghanistan and therefore add value, create employment, generate entrepreneurship, and create that kind of larger market within which the Afghan state could become more viable, because it would get revenues both from trade as well as from mining, beneficiation, and so on. So these are just points that I'm leaving for thought and for discussion. May I now call upon our next speaker? I think it's Ms. Shukriya Yari. Will you please have the floor? And please remember, about 8 minutes.
So thank you so much, sir. Good pleasure to be here and to have the opportunity to share some thoughts on the whole peace process, which is paramount to me as an Afghan and of course to the rest of Afghans residing inside and outside of the country. So I'm going to start with the question which was asked in the chat box, that what I think of peace. When I think of peace, I think of absence of war. I think of when the rudimentary human rights is protected indiscriminately and when treated equally regardless of gender, religion, and ethnicity. So currently we all know that Afghanistan is in a fragile state and peace is highly desirable due to two reasons. One is that the cost of war is too high in blood, and the second thing is that it is very, very important for the stability of the country. So today I would like to share two things briefly. One is my expectations and the other is my apprehension from the peace process. To start off from my expectations by emphasizing on the importance of peace, not only for the people inside of the country, but also for millions of Afghan refugees who live outside of Afghanistan. So Afghans form one of the largest protracted refugee population in the world. For instance, there are currently 1.5 million registered and 1 million unregistered Afghan refugees in Pakistan. We have approximately 2.5 Afghan refugees in Iran and thousands of Afghan refugees in India, and also in other parts of the world as well, especially include
Yeah, there is a technical obstruction. We'll wait for you to come back. Yeah, poor network once again. We'll give her a chance. Ms. Yari, I think there is a problem with the network on your end. I don't suppose you'll be able to hear me, but we will come back. We noted where you have ended right now. May I just then take this opportunity to invite our third speaker, that is Mr. Nawid Shirzai, and then we'll come back to Ms. Shukriya Yari to resume her talk. So, Mr. Shirzai, please take the floor.
Yes, good afternoon, sir. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes, good afternoon to everyone, and it's great to see you all here. Thank you for joining, and a special thanks to Mr. Ambassador for giving me the opportunity to deliver my thoughts. I will have a brief overview from Taliban's formation to the current peace talk. Then I will point out the key concerns. Furthermore, I will be delivering my perspective from the current peace talks. Ultimately, I will
Can you just speak a little louder or come closer to the microphone, Mr. Shirzai?
Now it's okay?
Yeah, okay. There's a little bit of an echo, but yeah, better.
I will point it out the key concerns. Furthermore, I will be delivering my perspective from the current peace talks, and ultimately, I will end my speeches with some overall conclusions. Between 1993 to 1994, during the Afghan Civil War, whispers of a group of religious students were heard and sponsored in schools in Pakistan. The group called itself the Islamic Taliban, means Islamic Movement of Taliban, and infiltrated Afghanistan from the southern border, Kandahar province, with a slogan implementing Islamic Sharia, and fighting what it calls evil and corruption in Afghanistan, and quickly invaded various cities and provinces. By 1998, the Taliban had controlled almost 90% of Afghanistan. On September 11, 2001, the paper returned to the Taliban. Al-Qaeda, which the Taliban had sheltered its leaders and refused to hand over, hijacked passenger planes, attacked targets in New York and Washington, and killed thousands. It took less than a month for the United States to attack the Taliban at the head of a coalition of allies, and by the first week of December 2001, the group had fallen. In the early years after the fall of the Taliban, peace returned to Afghanistan, boys and girls returned to school, women were allowed to work, free media increased, and government and democratic institutions were formed and strengthened. This includes the adoption of the constitution, the formation of the army, holding of presidential and parliamentary elections, and the disarmament process of irresponsible groups, along with the formation and strengthening of the army and national police. In the year that followed, and more so after 2006, Taliban attacks and bombings became more and more complex, and few places in Afghanistan survived the attacks. Even the presidential palace, ministries, and NATO headquarters in Afghanistan. Thousands of civilians have been killed and tens of thousands injured since the US-led invasion in October 2001. Finally, it got to the point where the United States, which said it had come to Afghanistan to eliminate the Taliban and to support and strengthen democracy, agreed to sit down with the group. And finally, on February 29, 2020, a Taliban-US peace deal based on the withdrawal of foreign troops from Afghanistan and move toward inter-Afghan talks were signed. The main conditions that the United States emphasized in the agreement were the Taliban distance themselves from groups as ISIS and Al-Qaeda, not treating US interests. Other issues including the type of government system, the fate of the army and elected institutions, the constitution, and the rights and freedoms of the Afghan people were postponed to inter-Afghan talks, which is now in progress and started on September 12, 2020. The Taliban, which emerged as an armed group during Afghanistan's civil war, has become one of the most influential over the past 25 years and is currently negotiating with Afghan delegates despite not recognizing the Afghan government. The national government is sitting at the negotiating table with the Taliban. The political arrangements with the aim of maintaining security and calm after the withdrawal of US troops from Afghanistan. The Taliban group is still dreaming of forming an Islamic Emirate. According to Suhail Shaheen, a spokesman for the Taliban's political office in Doha, the Taliban has two main goals during the peace talks. First, the withdrawal of US troops, and second, the establishment of an Islamic system in Afghanistan. And it's clear that what is meant by the Islamic system here is not a government that is inconsistent with the Taliban's interpretations of Islam. The key concerns on the peace process. So due to the time limitation, I had tried to include a few important concerns only, otherwise much more concerns are seen. 1. Taliban are trying to get back to the power center without having any specific plan or strategy for Afghanistan's development. Both the Taliban and Afghanistan government do not have proper strategies in all aspects for post-peace process, especially Taliban, which are claiming for power sharing and withdrawal of foreigners from Afghanistan. Two possibilities will be there. One, the new established government will refuse all stakeholders of Afghanistan, which will cause the country become in dormancy and recession. And second, they will continue to get same advantages from the partners which current government are attaining them. If that's so, why they are killing thousands of civilians by the name of jihad? Two, during the Taliban government from 1996 to 2001, all the systems were in a very bad situation and even destroyed, including education, health system, economy, and so on. And poverty was rampant in the country. Still, those are the main focusing areas, but at least we are witness of some improvements. Illiteracy, along with other challenges, is a serious problem among Afghan youths. The Afghan Ministry of Education says that currently approximately 42% of country's population is literate, of which 1/3 of them are women. Meanwhile, based on the national strategy developed by the ministry, the literacy rate will increase to 60% in 2030. But the Taliban have not a specific perspective on these issues. And the 20 years achievements will be in risk after the Taliban get back to the power. 3. By signing the peace deal on 29 February 2020 with the Taliban, the United States has given them undue power and has made them a legitimate entity which they do not deserve to be. After signing the deal, the Taliban still continued attacking on Afghan armies and police, which causes civilian fatalities. Before they had a statement that their fighting is against the foreigners and unbelievers which seize their country and the current government are helping them. So after the deal, the United States agreed to withdraw their troops, but still the Taliban killing civilians without any reason. Yes, the only reason is they are power thirsty and they're killing people to get back to the power, and we civilians do not need them as future leaders. Any group killing their civilians for getting into power or never take part in development of the country. 4. Not only the US, but several countries also hosted the Taliban and wanted to speak to them during the run-up to the talks, making them more legitimate than ever. Besides the internal dynamics, President Ghani and Abdullah political dispensation and power sharing, there are some external influences to the peace talks caused by some countries who hosting the Taliban during peace talks. Afghanistan's future largely depends on how regional and international stakeholders respond to the evolving political and security. While long-term peace in Afghanistan will benefit all powers, the need to secure relevant strategic interests in the country, which are often in conflict, could threaten the prospects for peace in general. In addition, mutual tensions between many foreigner actors could spread to Afghanistan, undermine collective regional efforts, and significantly change the outcome of the process. 5. This recognition of the international community and the awareness that the US is desperate to leave Afghanistan has emboldened the Taliban. They are displaying that attitude during negotiation with the Afghan government. It's worth noting that Afghan government delegates need to be more careful and not accept any single terminology which becomes a hazard to the security and safety of Afghan people in the future. My perspective from the current peace talk. Again, time restriction did not allow me to point out all the issues, but the factors which we'll be discussing are very critical points. 1. The talks started by addressing very banal issues. For example, to decide about the country's name. Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. Both terms are Islamic names. Instead, there are very important and key points to rise up, discuss, and get some proper agreements, like human rights, women's rights, bridge the gap between the democracy and Islamic system, and how to battle against third parties, and many other issues. Now that the second round has begun, I hope the significant issues are addressed. 2. Stop war and start negotiations. Immediate and comprehensive ceasefire is crucial. Peace with the Taliban will be a very important and primary step towards achieving a complete aim of real peace. Now, if the Taliban are supposed to think about their country's current situation and future growth, they can prove it by stopping war and then continue to the peace talk. With that, the deaths of civilians will be prevented and all the people will support the program heartedly. If not, the people will never vote for the Taliban, and the interior fighting will be continued even the Taliban get back to that.
Mr. Shirzai, you need to hurry up a little.
Okay, Professor. 3. Protection of human rights, women's rights, freedom of speech, and etc. need to be addressed substantially during the negotiation. These are the great achievements of the current government. And all young professionals, civil society, and most Afghan residences are happy with those achievements. During the Taliban previous government under Mullah Muhammad Umar, the girls were avoided to go to school. The first guide to every person is mother. Preventing them from gaining knowledge would be a critical and dangerous strike to the body of society. So I fully and strongly request from the all Afghan delegates to address these issues properly and never accept even a single opinion in prevention and cancellation of these factors. India has been a consistent friend and partner to Afghanistan, and its involvement in the peace process would be important. Till now, India have a very old and good diplomatic relationship with Afghanistan. India had taken part in development of Afghanistan very actively by implementing around 400 projects in different provinces of. In addition, the government of India is providing fully and partially funded scholarship schemes for Afghan youths to further explore their knowledge and take part in the construction and rehabilitation of their country. So the positive point which led to India participation in the talk process is that they are trying to support Afghan-led, Afghan-owned, and Afghan-controlled peace talks. So as a conclusion, with that I will end my talks at this point. The Afghan government, which has faced Taliban sabotage since its inception and sees the group's actions as a major obstacle to the Afghanistan security and development, has in recent months given up hope of continued US supports and accepted the Taliban as a way out, which has seen the undeniable reality in Afghanistan. Kabul is sitting at a negotiating table with the group, hoping that the Taliban will not take advantage of the power vacuum created by US withdrawal from Afghanistan as part of the Iraq. But what is of great concern is that, given yesterday's record and the Taliban's actions today, it's unlikely that the group will give up its aspirations and destroy the Afghan people's achievement in democracy and freedom and human rights over the past 19 years. Afghanistan is now on the verge of consolidating democracy after a transition period. It does not make sense to devastate this success by the re-entry of a group with an anti-democratic and reactionary ideology into power. In any case, since they are the subject of human political issues, no definite protection can be made in this area, but it seems that Afghan government, in agreement with the Taliban, is slaughtering both democracy and freedom and security of Afghan people. Ultimately, the Taliban negotiator is stating that Afghanistan must have an Islamic system with no ethnic discrimination. We need to explain it. During the 2-decade war, they killed civilians with a statistic already mentioned and available in all websites. So, is that the way what our religion wants? And do they act completely what Islam wants when they ruled Afghanistan from 1996 to 2001? Preventing girls from school never restricted for Islam. Destroying the country's infrastructure does not fit the West law.
Mr. Shirzai, 15 seconds more.
Okay, sir. There is nothing against human rights and women's rights in Islam, but they continuously violated the regulations. Mullah Abdul Ghani brother mentioned that we want Afghanistan to be independent development. Simply by saying these few words, do they are able to do it? Never. They should present their policy in this regard, including how they want to break the gap between democracy and Islamic system. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Shirzai. Yeah, I think we've got your point. Thank you very much. We need to give the remaining speakers a chance. So can we end? Okay. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt. I'm sure we'll work out something so that your full statements are recorded. May I check if, before I give the floor to Ms. Meena Nizami, whether Ms. Shukriya Yari, are you back and are you connected now?
Yes, sir, and sorry for that. I think
No problem. It's not your fault. But please feel free. Step in now. Do try to be quick because we are running a little out of time, but feel free to make your points.
So I think I'm done with the first point. Now I'm going to the second point, emphasizing on the inclusivity and the right to live with dignity for everyone. Over the course of years, we have lost tens of thousands of lives, ranging from journalists, activists to civilians, including students, women, and children. Some of the major and heinous attacks that I can think of is the attacks on Afghan Sikhs and Hindus, the minorities, Kabul University, hospitals, schools, institutions, which is very upsetting. And it is important that every citizens get to live with dignity, including the minority religious group. When I mentioned the minority, as a friend already mentioned it about Hazara, and also I emphasize on the Sikh and Hindus, Afghan Sikh and Hindus as well. Moreover, Afghanistan is a multi-ethnic country. There should be a consensual agreement on building a high council of national reconciliation in an inclusive governmental body that would be representative of aspiration of all Afghan men and women. This would ensure that those with no voice or maybe little voice have the chance to be heard. The third point I'm going to emphasize is taking women's rights into consideration. Afghan women are the integral part of the society who have always been the most vulnerable and affected ones in Afghanistan. In the last 2 decades, women have had a significant changes and opportunities available to them. So compromising on their rights means their gains are being sacrificed on the bargaining process. Hence, the efforts, hard work, and the talent of the brave and resilient women of Afghanistan should not be overlooked, nor should their rights get ignored in the process, because it will simply set the scene for significant problems at a larger state of implementation. It is more important to think of the quality and also the outcome of peace negotiation rather than speed of peace. In hurry, if we agree on everything that we are asked for, then the possibility outcome, I think, would be not beneficial for all of us. Number 4, I would be emphasizing on the importance and role of India in Afghanistan. Afghanistan requires India's support at this time. As we recognize the importance role of India in Afghanistan, it is very difficult actually to manage everything on their own because Afghanistan lacks institutional capacity. And over the course of years, India has been a huge support for Afghanistan, as India has invested heavily and has goodwill of a large section of populations. India is the largest regional donor in Afghanistan with humanitarian support package of approximately, I think, $3 billion US for civil infrastructure projects, hospitals, educational institutions, Afghan parliament building, training to the Afghan security forces, and recently supplies to combat COVID-19. We need to build on this goodwill by adopting a more vigorous approach. We should continue in our endeavor to strengthen the national government so that it may not be pushed to agree to the unacceptable terms. Our diplomacy should be geared to develop a consensus for UN peacekeeping force to be stationed there. India may appoint a special envoy who should have full support for all quarter of establishment for taking necessary steps and protect our interest as the situation develops. And I personally think it is not wise to remain outside, as Afghanistan is strategically and economically important to India. It provides connectivity to Central Asia, which has valuable valuable markets and rich natural resources. Also, it has a cultural links with Afghanistan. Therefore, it is important for both India and Afghanistan to have a friendly relationship and support Afghanistan at this difficult time. Now, coming to my apprehension that I have from the peace process, I'm going to highlight only 3 points, starting from compromising on women's rights. Let's look at the opportunities that we have had in the last 2 decades, particularly the opportunities for girls and women since 2001. The Constitution granting certain freedoms, including the right to education for women. It was a very big deal for us. Women have come a long way. Despite the manifold barriers in the country, they have done a lot for themselves and also for the country. They deserve to be progressing instead of getting back to the same situation once they had been during the darkest era. And my apprehension would be that what if this peace talk fails? Because to me personally, the Taliban is already getting what they want. They have not stopped killing people, first thing. Secondly, the Taliban attacks on the country are on the rise. And thirdly, they have ensured the withdrawal of US troops from Afghanistan. And at the same time, they have got 5,000 Taliban prisoners released from prisons. Probably many more in the future. This is possibility of what if the hard-won gains of women get shattered once again. The second point I'm going to highlight is the vacuum to be created by the US withdrawal in the future would enhance uncertainty and instability and provide with an excellent opportunity for Pakistan, supported by China, and also for Russia and Iran to enhance their influence in Afghanistan. How the events would unfold in the future is something I also don't know about, but I know that it will definitely be difficult for Afghan government to stand strong without the help of international community, and of course, as I explained before, without the help of India's support. It will be very challenging for us to fight this. I think Taliban have a strong links with other extremist groups as well, which will be even more difficult to fight them alone. They seem to have the ability to attack the Afghan national defense and security forces with impunity. And the last point I would like to highlight is that my personal view, I'm personally doubtful of Taliban having changed a little since the darkest days of its regime, when it killed women accused of not being obedient, attacked minority religious groups, and prohibited girls from getting education. So many Afghans, including me, are worried about Taliban bringing or implementing the same strategy once they fully take over the control and be part of the government. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Shukriya. I think some very, very valuable, important points all of the speakers have made. But let me just mention, so that we don't forget it, I think you've flagged this whole issue, what if the peace talks fail? A second issue that you flagged was that India should lend full diplomatic support to effectively what constitutes the gains of the last 2 years, that is in the international fora. And a very specific proposal that you've made is that India should appoint a special envoy to move this process forward. I think very good points. I think all the points of all the speakers have been excellent. The notion of peace, the notion of, what Mr. Seerat talked about, a kind of very narrow definition of peace, even the whole question of, whether a proper survey has been taken of whether people want the kind of peace that the Taliban are likely to bring. So I think there are very fundamental issues that all of you have raised. Now, Dr. Ghosh, I noticed that we have about 23 minutes left. I do not want to cut short the time of all the other speakers. We've still 3 speakers left. So I hope we can exceed and go over a little without any problem, so that we have time for discussion, because I'd like to flag some of the points finally, so that in the discussions we have a discussion on that. Right. So our next speaker, I think Ms. Meena Nizami, has been waiting with anticipation for quite some time. You have the platform. Please go ahead. And try to be telegraphic. Where the points have been made by others, you can just kind of, reiterate that point and try to focus on the new points that you might like to make.
Hi everyone, I'm glad to be part of today's panel discussion.
The volume needs to be higher.
Audible now?
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. I'm glad to be part of today's panel discussion with presence of respective Ambassador Mukhopadhaya and Ms. Mariam Safi and my fellow Afghan students in India. Thanks to Ms. Anwesha Ghosh and the Indian Council of World Affairs for taking this initiative to amplify the voices of Afghan youth about Afghanistan's opportunity for peace, a topic that is very less discussed with youth and the young generation of Afghanistan. I would like to share a few points about India and Afghanistan have always had a strong relationship based on historical and cultural links. India has played a significant role in the reconstruction and rehabilitation of Afghanistan. We cannot define that fact. We believe that democracy and development are the key instruments to ensure that Afghanistan becomes a source of regional stability, and we appreciate India's constant support and effort in helping us reach there. I would like to share my perspectives about Afghanistan's opportunity for peace by emphasizing about the topic of how important it is to include women and youth and the younger generation in the government decision making. I hope everyone present here by the end of this discussion have recognized or will recognize the crucial importance of youth, especially women's engagement in the government decision making, something that the Taliban, I'm sure, are not very happy to include women in the peace talks process. Afghanistan witnessed a massive transformation after the collapse of the Taliban regime and the establishment of the democratic government in 2001. This transformation helped the young generation of Afghanistan to become more familiar with modern technology and modern sciences. And today, the worldview and the conduct of youth are very different from the past. The performance of youth have been very positive in administrative, political, social, cultural, and media affairs. And youth's massive turnouts in previous elections indicates that youth are eager for promotion of democratic values and human rights. The young generation of Afghanistan have passed a lot of challenges to make this possible, and however, overlooking those challenges will cause us a rollback. To share some statistics about better understanding of that Afghanistan as one of the youngest and fastest growing populations in the world. Approximately 63% of the population are youth below the 25 years of age. And this tells us that youth are the majority of the population in Afghanistan, and hence their political participation, which can shape the future government and the policies, is very crucial. Therefore, engagement of Afghan youth in political decision-making is the gateway to a brighter future for Afghanistan. Like I noticed about our fellow Afghans, including Shukriya Yari, she mentioned some really beautiful points and important points about, the challenges Afghans are facing, and I'm sure that these points that our fellow Afghan youth have mentioned here are only core to our understanding. I'm not sure that our older generation will be aware of it, because we consist the maximum number of population in Afghanistan, and we are more aware of what issues are persistent to us. So another important point I would like to emphasize upon is the role of women in the peace process. Maybe we are not any expert in the field of gender equality or women's issues like most people all around the world are. So I would like to share some statistics that shows Afghanistan is the second worst country to be a woman in the world after Yemen. This is according to the National Geographic Women, Peace and Security Index. This statistics that shows that the role of the woman played in the peace process so far, the last 19 years has also not been easy for Afghan women, and the journey ahead will also not be easy. Talking about my expectations as an Afghan woman or a student studying in India giving me this opportunity to study and carry my education here from the peace process in Afghanistan is that since the pre-negotiation phase, there has been any serious discussion on the commitment of women's issues. In conversation with female representatives, they have made very, very vague promises that it would not return to the dark days of their domination in the 1990s. But there has been no serious commitment on women's issues so far. Also, a few studies suggest, in fact, a very recent study by UN Women shows that only 15% of Afghan men think that women should be allowed to work outside of their homes after marriage. And a UN study also revealed that 80% of Afghan women experience domestic violence, and 50% of women are in Afghan prisons that have been jailed for moral crimes, such as having sexual relations out of marriage, and have been prosecuted for killing their brutally abusive husbands, including in self-defense. Distressingly, not only the Taliban, but important segments of Afghan society appear to be growing more conservative, embracing the dictatorship doctrines that call for reducing women's rights and freedom. I believe that Taliban do not believe in the peace negotiations and power sharing, and they still want to capture the power by military force. I think that they are untrustworthy, but we still have a gateway to peace process by bringing this negotiating peace talks. I think their beliefs are irreconcilable with modernity and the rights of women. And also the role of the international community and regional actors are also critical at this point. Their backing for the Islamic Republic and support for the government is very important. I believe that these issues about women call for us to take immediate action and enable women to assert their rights, to help them share their voices against injustice. They make half of the country's population, and we cannot ignore their existence. Afghanistan, I believe, is a country that is undergoing widespread social and cultural change. Gender norms are being discussed and what it means to be an Afghan, especially Afghan woman in the modern world. This is part of the discussion, but what we need to involve and engage women in government policy making or peace process talks is because it matters greatly to improving the life of everyone in Afghanistan. I think it's really important to have women in the public service. When we are on the table, we are present in the room, the discussion includes women, their well-being and their special needs. And we also have brilliant, well-educated, experienced and competent women in Afghanistan who deserve to be in the Afghan government and decision-making process. But there are also other apprehensions that all these women do not get enough job opportunities in Afghanistan. These women can actually act as medium to represent the voices of Afghan women, their concerns and needs. Only by including women in the discussions we can aim for a progressive society. And as far as I know, the Taliban, if they do not include women in the government, in the economic spheres, and do not and take their rights granted, there would be no a way forward to a peaceful negotiation or a peaceful country in the future. Also, as the founder and representative of Girl Up in Afghanistan, Girl Up, a campaign that works in different countries around the world to support comprehensive programs that give adults and girls in developing countries an equal chance for education, health, social and economic opportunities, a life free from violence. I am very much apprehensive about the future of young Afghan girls and Afghans in general on two counts. One is the drying up of job opportunities, and especially for women, because women are educated. Afghan women, they have done a lot of education, but they don't get jobs. I believe this is at this scenario that we are in Afghanistan, it is very difficult for Afghans in general to have jobs, but even more especially difficult for women, because they see a lot of discrimination and prejudices in the job places. And also the second thing is that how educated Afghan girls will be perceived by the Taliban, and if Taliban allows women to study and educate, because education is the only key to progress and to building up a better future. So I believe that Girl Up, like campaigns like Girl Up, like the He for She and other campaigns, we're inspiring a generation of girls to be a force for gender equality and social change. And with having a government that cannot support girls at its very core, that is education and full economic freedom, we cannot have a better society and a peaceful country that includes women as well in the process of government development. So I hope India continues to back Afghan girls and women the way they have always done in the past. The ICCR scholarship program that gives Afghan students a chance to study in India and then go back to Afghanistan and serve back. This is very important in this respect. And today, most of the crucial ministries of Afghanistan have people who are trained and educated in India. Its role and capacity building of young Afghans have always been particularly significant. I hope India continues to do that same in the future as well. Thank you so much for the time given to me. I will now leave the floor to Mr. Mukhopadhaya. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Nizami, for a very forceful and resounding statement on both the prospects that face women as well as the advances that have been made. We recognize your concern that, perhaps doors that have been opened over the last 20 years may actually close if, this process brings the Taliban, gives them too much authority to be able to impose their worldview and particularly their view of women. So thank you very much. That was very articulate. Appreciate very much. And also, I think echoing some of the points that you made from Ms. Shukriya, and one point that I missed out in Ms. Shukriya's presentation was, I think, the very interesting observations she made about the region and which countries are likely to profit from this peace process and how, in fact, that might actually make Afghanistan's situation more difficult. But, you are here we are not here to listen to my views by and large. We are here to listen to the views of our remaining two Afghan participants. So the first of them is Mr. Asif Hamraz. I also notice he's been waiting very patiently. The platform, the Blue Jeans platform is yours. And then finally, we will come to our last speaker for this afternoon, Mr. Hafiz Latifi. Please do try to be brief and make your points and avoid repetition, because I think there's been a general trend which is very much in a common direction. So we understand what the views are. Please feel free now.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. It is great pleasure that have the opportunity to share some thoughts and view about my country. So let me first appreciate the ICWA that provided this opportunity to us. So, however, the panelists and the speakers have covered the important gaps and topics. So, briefly, I touch some points regarding to the ceasefire, regarding to the Doha agreement that Taliban and US has signed it. And also I would share some concern about the people that I was in touch with them, and I would also talk about the India and Afghanistan relationship and the support that India made. And last point, I will talk about my own concern that as a young generation. So it is 4 decades that Afghanistan's experienced the violence and war over there, and so it caused so much of distraction and loss of lives, and everybody has suffered from this prolonged violence. So in this case, the intra-Afghan talks is very important and gives the hope for the people that one day they end the violence and they reach to a peaceful agreement. So in this case, I would my point is about the importance of ceasefire, as Ms. Safi has also emphasized on. So my point is that it is important that Taliban agree on a nationwide ceasefire, because the increase of violence and attacks takes so many innocent lives on the daily basis. Violence breeds anxiety, fear, and enmity that generally preclude negotiation and any hope for a peaceful solution to underlying disputes. The attack on on Kabul University, the daily basis blasting we see every day, targeting the influential people, is creating fear among people. So ceasefire is the need of hour in my country. So the Taliban should notice if there isn't ceasefire, the violence will continue, that not only take innocent lives, but can also affect the peace process itself. So it is very important that the Taliban should be agree on a ceasefire. So if really they want to reach to a peace agreement in Afghanistan, so if they already want to have a peaceful country, so however they express that, but they are not believing what they are telling. So secondly, I would like to talk about Doha Agreement. The current peace talk looks less about peace in Afghanistan, unfortunately, and more about U.S. lost interest in the country and a desire to exit from Afghanistan, which led the Trump administration to sign the hurried deal agreement with Taliban. That resulted in more violence and killing in Afghanistan. So now, fortunately, we see that there is a change U.S. Policy regarding Taliban. When President Biden took the office, his administration announced that they would review the U.S.-Taliban agreement, which was signed during Trump. Because a hostility withdrawal can lead the country to experience new conflict, as well as the future of youth, their dreams, aspiration, and the past achievements. It is worth mentioning that the Afghan government has also been kept in the dark about the U.S.-Taliban agreement, as the Afghan government was not part of the peace agreement that was signed between U.S. and Taliban. And this make weaken the position of the Afghan government in the peace negotiation. So, in the light of these developments, we are, as a people of Afghanistan, demand from President Biden and his administration to take this to reconsideration, that if U.S. pull out its troop based on the agreement, it may put Afghanistan in danger, and again it will change the safe area for Al-Qaeda and Daesh, Taliban, and other terrorist group as well, like post 9/11. So in this part, I also demand from request from India to raise their voice in order to for a stable peace in Afghanistan. So if so, we are in a area that if Afghanistan's there running there will be exist conflict and fight. It also hurt other countries like India as well. So another things is the concern of civil society, human rights activists, women activists, and minorities and other people are concerned about whether the Afghanistan government is strong enough to address their demands and protect the achievements of past 20 years or not. So a weak state cannot become a strong representative of the people. There is many challenges ahead of us, and everyone in the country, namely the ordinary people and those who were oppressed, are concerned fearing the history might repeat itself. So in this part, we also like to again request India to have strongly their supports, diplomatic supports for political stability in Afghanistan. And the fourth point I would like to make remarks about India-Afghanistan friendship and partnership. However, the other friends has talked about the supports that India made in Afghanistan, but particularly as I am the ICCR students, scholarship students, particularly I want to talk about the scholarship and the capacity building programs and education that India still has provided for Afghanistan. So as in employee of the Ministry of Higher Education and a current student pursuing my master's degree in India, I'm particularly appreciative of India's contribution in the human resource development and empowering the young Afghans. Education is a key for a better future, and we are grateful to India for supporting the Afghanistans in this area. So again, we request India to continue their supports, especially in field of education, and more I emphasize that in these kind of supports, India should notice the gender equality. So it is very important to empower the women in Afghanistan, because 50% of the people in Afghanistan are women, and if the women get in power, and so they would actively participate in everything, so which is in the future result to make a strong community, make support the peace and progression in Afghanistan. So at the end, I want to share my own concern. So in every young has their own concern about their future. So particularly as Dr. Ghosh said that over 65,000 Afghan students have studied in India in the last 10 years, and many of them are the current government employee. So I also an employee of government, and tended to go to Afghanistan and join the Ministry of Higher Education. So I believe that only education can make the future of me and my generation brighter. But the concern is that the Taliban are likely to be suspicious of Afghans who were educated in India. So I mean, if they come to power, so if in the future, if they are be a partner of the current government, so they will be suspicious on those who are studied in India, educated in India. So they will probably look at as a Indian spies, as now the views exist about those who are educated in Iran. So I am quite worried about that, and many share this concern, because if the Taliban comes to power, they would try to create problems for those who studied in India. Despite all this, as an Afghan youth who has the best interest of the country in heart, I look forward to see peace in my country. I look to a future that everyone, regardless of their background, race, religious, sexual orientation, has the opportunity to live their lives, get privilege and rights citizen of the country. I look forward to a future where everyone has the opportunity to live a life of their choice, has the chance to contribute in national building and making the country filled with possibilities. Last but not least, I would like to state that it is an honor to share this panel with such distinguished panelists. I am particularly thankful to ICWA for providing us with a platform of the voice, our opinion in front of such learned audience. Thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hamraz. I join you in applauding the ICWA for this particular initiative. And let me also assure you, because this concern was also raised by Ms. Meena Nizami, I don't think you should harbor any doubt. All the students have spoken about this. We should harbor no doubt that India's scholarship program will continue. I also thank you for expressing the concern that perhaps if the Taliban were to come in power, the prospects of job opportunities and for Indian educated students may get limited. But of course, we are very conscious of considerations like that. And naturally, to the extent that if the peace talks do progress, these are concerns that we will definitely reflect in our diplomatic interventions. And I also want to assure you that Dr. Ghosh had also highlighted this in the beginning, that our development assistance and partnership and the trade kind of initiatives that we have taken, all this will continue. And a sign of that was the Prime Minister's recent inauguration of the Shatut Dam, which is of course a very major initiative, over $200 million initiative to supply drinking water to Kabul. So I think you should, and all of you should be under no doubt that India will continue to support the new Afghanistan. And India will continue to support development, education, as well as the peace process in a direction that does not lose. And I notice here that there is an almost total consensus that nobody, probably none of the students in India and perhaps elsewhere, want to lose that opportunity that they have got over the last 20 years. And it is very important to make this point very strongly to those members of the international community who are giving up on Afghanistan, that they have a duty to this new Afghanistan. I'm sorry to come in the way of Mr. Hafiz Latifi to make his statement, the final statement. And once again, I will appeal to you because we are already actually past 5. I'm counting on the generosity of everyone to extend this. So please, where you're making the same points that others have made, be brief. But if you have any new points, please feel free to express them. Thank you. Welcome, please.
Am I audible? Hello? Hello?
Yes.
Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible. You can speak louder though.
Okay. His Excellency Ambassador Mukhopadhaya, Ms. Mariam Safi and Dr. Anwesha Ghosh and scholars. So I'm not going to, first of all, Assalamu alaikum and namaskar. I'm very delighted to be part of this event. I'm not going to repeat the concern of other students who has highlighted their concern. So first of all, I would like to thank the Indian Council for World Affairs for their initiative in organizing this webinar and giving us the opportunity to share our concerns and related to the peace process. My speech is about the concern related to the future of cultural heritage in Afghanistan. Although it is very difficult to summarize all these aspects of the preservation and the role of heritage in peace process due to the time limitation, but I would like to begin my speech with a brief highlighting of UNESCO's description of cultural heritage, which says the legacy of physical artifacts and intangible attributes of a society that are inherited from a past generation, maintained in the present and bestowed for the future, for the benefit of future generation. So cultural heritage is a concept which offers a bridge between the past and future with the application of particular approaches in the present. So archaeological exploration in the region of Afghanistan has clearly revealed the potential and significance of Afghanistan's pre-Islamic and Islamic past. At the same time, during this past 4 decades of war, political instability and security in the region, which has resulted to the destruction of monuments, looting of many archaeological sites and monuments, and iconic treasures of museums. So there have been many projects and programs towards the protection, preservation, promoting of heritage to the public, by government agencies and in collaboration with international agencies through their technical and financial support. But in the last 2 decades, but Afghanistan's cultural heritage from the historical perspective, it is important not only for the Afghans and for Afghanistan and the region, but also for the entire world. Therefore, its preservation and protection is not the duty and obligation of Afghans who inherited them from their ancestors, but also for international communities, as all cultural heritage is the cultural heritage of humanity, does not recognize race, ethnicity, religion, and nationality. Looking back at the events in the past, it is clear that national and international communities must continue to identify means and mechanisms to develop policies and execute them to preserve heritage. Its protection and conservation can play a key role in rebuilding society's peace process, strengthening the sense of national identity. Coming to the Indo-Afghan relationship, so I'm not going to talk about the modern relationship, but the Indo-Afghan relationship is not a new phenomenon. It has its origin on the prehistoric time. long before the modern political boundaries were built. Because this fact could be testified by the discovery of an Indus Valley civilization site named Shortokai in northern Afghanistan. So in the course of history, India and Afghanistan had a lot of historical and political cultural ties. Not going to come in the support of India since the establishment of new government, and we are all thankful for their generous support and help in different sectors. But coming to this peace negotiation and the position of cultural heritage in this peace negotiation, as a student of archaeology and cultural heritage, I would like to share my concern and apprehension regarding the position of cultural heritage in the ongoing peace negotiation and its future after the establishment of peace in the region. During the negotiation, the Afghan government and delegates in Doha consistently said that all the aspects of democracy, the values of republic, and achievements over the past 20 years, as well as the protection of cultural heritage, will not be compromised in the peace process. A statement recorded in the ARC International states that in early October 2020, ARC International presented a petition letter to Afghan government and Afghan government delegation and Taliban delegation. Both sides are currently negotiating for the peace process. So despite this stress on cultural heritage preservation by the delegates and also few international organizations, we still see that there is no particular agenda in the position of negotiation table. On the other hand, frankly speaking, it is clear to all of us that Taliban have not been honest in their commitments. And a recent and very surprising statement came related to the concern of Taliban for the protection of cultural heritage in their website, and also it is spreading throughout the social media in these days. They state that Afghanistan has rich history and rich culture. So they ordered all their Taliban leaders and commanders all over Afghanistan to stop the destruction of cultural heritage, looting, and illegal excavation across the country. This is very interesting topic, but in my opinion, it has two sides. This statement has two sides. First, it shows a change in the view of Taliban towards the cultural heritage, that is in a question mark. Secondly, the order comes as the Taliban have been accused of destroying and looting of historical and cultural monuments in the past. I see it as a coincidence with their order after the 1998 when they first decided to destroy the Buddha of Bamyan. So the destruction of Buddha of Bamyan did not happen in 2001. They decided to destroy it and they defaced a part of the face of Buddha in 1998. But with the concern from the agencies and organizations across the world, they promised that they will protect them. But on 26 February 2001, which will be tomorrow, and it is 20 years after this Mullah decree, which he issued and ordering the elimination of all the non-Islamic status. Then how we should trust them? In my opinion, it is a kind of cheating and it is a tactic to attract the attention of the world, to show themselves as an angel for peace. But as we see in the past, they have destroyed cultural heritage, and this insecurity and instability and the war they have continued during the past year, it resulted to the destruction of many archaeological sites. This is the fact that only government of Afghanistan and some agencies know this, not the public people. So the public, Afghan public should know about this fact as well. Coming to the role of India in this peace negotiation. So India, as a regional supporter, could play a vital role in establishing peace in Afghanistan and protecting the cultural heritage of the region. Between the two states, often prompted Indian government in the past to send delegation of that have often helped in exchange showcasing of the weight of Afghanistan. I firmly believe that if such missions are restored, it would to be assessed in preserving the cultural heritage, and further it will strengthen ties between the two states in terms of culture exchange. Before I would like to say thanks to the to convey my gratitude to ICW for organizing this webinar in this great and important point, which to spread the voices from Afghanistan and their concerns in regards to the peace process from different backgrounds. I'm praying for the peace process, but also it will strengthen the relation between the two countries. We are thankful for the generous solidarity of India. It's rightly pointed out by His Excellency Prime Minister Narendra Modi in his recent speech that no external power development of Afghanistan or its friendship with India. They're coming into conclusion that given different backgrounds, we have to see Taliban not as a political power. We still believe that they are a group of terrorists. They have ties with the regional supporters. Now, I'm not going to tell the names as it is clear for all of us, but the concern is there. If they come as a part of the government, because now it's a misunderstanding for the Taliban that they see the US agreement, this peace agreement, as a sign of victory, and they are preparing for the future of control over Afghanistan. So here, the concern from different perspectives is very valuable, and I hope it should be taken into consideration in the peace negotiation for the better future of Afghanistan. Myself, for example, I finished my school during the Taliban period, and I was wearing the turban and going to school, and I don't want that situation to come back again. So we have experience, and we have experience of this Islamic Sharia that was against that. So as a child, for example, we didn't have any chair or anything inside the school. We were going only, and they were teaching us not mathematics and other subjects, but only Islamic Sharia. So we don't want to come in that opinion. But our hope for the future of Afghanistan and this peace establishment is too much, and we rely on the regional supporters and international supporters. In regional, we are thankful to the honesty of the Indian government, and I suggest India to continue their support in different areas, especially in the area of protection of cultural heritage and this providing of scholarship for the people. Just only one thing I would like to share at the end. I studied in Europe and I lived for 6 years there. After the studying, many of my friends, they went out for a better life.
There's a lot of problem in the sound. Your voice is cracking up. Please go ahead. Please go ahead. No, I think.
Okay. So they went for a better life, and they went for a better life in Europe. But I believed in the future of my country, and I lived there, and I work in the area of cultural heritage preservation and excavation. But if Taliban, for example, will come and see it as a sign of victory and come once again there, so there is no place for us to go there once again. If Taliban is there because of their reasons. So thank you once again for giving us this opportunity to talk and share our concerns.
Thank you very much, Mr. Latifi, for highlighting something that I think had sort of generally escapes international attention, and also perhaps was not highlighted by anyone else here. So that was a very valuable contribution. And we all know the experience of the damage to the Bamiyan Buddhas. I myself have been there, and let me tell you one tiny story. In 1977, when I traveled through Afghanistan, for various reasons, I was able to go to Bande Mir, but I was not able to go to Bamiyan. And I thought that when I return, I'll be able to see it. In my return also, I missed it. By the time I went back the next time in 2001, they were gone. So this is really something that I personally also very strongly identify with. But thank you very much for your statement. Now, Dr. Ghosh, we don't have, we've exceeded our time. And I want to thank all our guests and all our listeners who have joined us through the various social media platforms for this event. And I really particularly would like to thank Ms. Safi, Mariam Safi, as well as Ambassador Tahir Qadiry for joining us and addressing us. And especially also to Dr. Mariam Safi for staying on and to listening to Afghan voices from India, along with her absolutely superb kind of introduction. Really want to thank you for your presence and for your solidarity and your solidarity with the young the generation. I will keep a couple of minutes to summarize, but before that, Dr. Ghosh, would you like to just check the chat box, which I can't see here, in case there are any questions from the audience that really have not been addressed and demand to be heard?
So there was a question initially that what the Afghan students mean by peace, and because they have lived there, they're a generation, they have only seen conflict and violence. What does peace mean to them? Shukriya has responded to that, but I'm not sure if others would want to chip in. From Ms. Deepika Saraswat, hasn't Chabahar generated any enthusiasm among Afghan business seeking access to Indian market? And finally, a peace process requires both sides to want peace. We see an Afghan government side desperately looking for peace and the Taliban side seeing this as a victory. How is it possible to reconcile the two divergent approaches? That question was for Ms. Safi.
So I think the first and third questions have been more or less addressed by, in one form or the other, by all the speakers. But the question on Chabahar has not been addressed. And I think it also touches largely on business sentiment. So one question that I would like any of the speakers, maybe Dr. Safi or anyone who wishes to address this question of Chabahar, and also I think some sense of this business sentiment in Afghanistan. And do you think under the current conditions, there is scope for continuing to do business, and in what way can we develop this relationship as well, the business relationship? Anyone would like to answer? If you can just, is there a raise hand feature? Or you can just raise your finger. Safi, may I ask?
Yeah.
Yes. Seerat,
yes, specifically on that question, whether there are some enthusiasm among business community in Afghanistan, I'm not aware, because we are not among them. So for one reason, and but the biggest problem is inside Afghanistan. I mean, a few days back we had this fire in Herat, Herat border side. So there, which shows that how much we lack infrastructures and equipments and all to facilitate this business and also the threats which may happen through Chabahar or is happening. So that's a big issue on that. I think we are lacking on Afghanistan side infrastructure on that. So that's, I think, the biggest problem. Yeah.
Okay. So, I think I might like to mention there that actually during the years since 2001, at least connectivity options have improved a lot. Of course, India contributed to the Zarang-Delaram road and now is doing something about Chabahar. But we've also heard about the Lapis Lazuli route. Of course, one big problem has been that transit through Pakistan has always been inhibited, and Pakistan shows no signs of liberalizing the APPTA to permit Indian goods to traverse Pakistan over land into Afghanistan, which will make a big difference, because the reality is that India is the biggest market for Afghanistan, and Afghanistan could gain a lot just from the trading relationship, if not even more than the trading relationship. I mentioned about the investment relationship. But yes, this is one big difference, that if tomorrow peace returns, there would be a much better opportunity to take advantage of the connectivity networks. In other words, Afghanistan is not going to be as landlocked as before. But of course, this requires obviously much more progress on the peace process. I would be happy. I don't know, Dr. Ghosh, do we have a few minutes? Because I was wanting to invite Ms. Safi to make a final wrap-up statement, perhaps. And and then I would make a few comments to close the session myself.
Right.
Dr. Safi, would you like to say a few words in response to the Afghan students in India?
Thank you very much, Ambassador. It's been an incredibly enriching webinar. Once again, thank you for holding it. I must say the thing that I grabbed the most from what was being said today is how much more work there is left to be done. And by that, I mean actually on the plates of both negotiating parties. The views that I get from the Afghan students is one of deep concern, one of which they feel that that not only their voices, but the voices of various segments of Afghan society are not yet represented at the table and they're not seeing it.
Right.
I gather from their perspectives that they are highly concerned about the type of eventual settlement that might come out, looking at what has been going on so far on the table. I see an acknowledgement that the Taliban are certainly on a better footing on the table than is the Republic. And I also hear a sentiment across all of them how important it is to protect the gains of the last 2 decades. And I must say that these are points that from a research organization perspective, as researchers, as members of civil society, we should take note of where we need to do a lot more work to identify public sentiment, to identify values. It was noted that a referendum was not done before the start of talks, but it's difficult to do a referendum before talks. I know that both sides have, at least the Afghan negotiating side has proposed to do a referendum or to present the findings or the actual agreement to a parliament for a vote. I believe that this is incredibly crucial at the end of the day when an agreement is reached to put that out there for the public to vote upon in order for them to be able to adopt it. Unless they absorb an agreement, the public will not implement it and will not accept it. So I absolutely see the value in the various suggestions and comments that were made, and it just it shows one, that there is a diverging of views, and that's a positive thing. Diverging of views is a positive thing. That's what makes our democracy so rich, even though we have a young democracy in Afghanistan. However, we need to make sure we can uphold these views, and we can make sure that we try to build, even not necessarily, I would say, a consensus by bringing everybody on the same page, but at least on the broad strokes of what this peace should be and how this peace should unfold. The peace that should emerge in this process, and we don't know how many years it will probably eventually take, should reflect the aspirations of the Afghan people, or it will not be sustainable. And I think that that was a cross-cutting issue that I heard from all the students today. And I would just like to say, in response to that last question, whether peace requires both sides to want it, but there are different views. Some say that the people of Afghanistan want peace, the Afghan government wants peace, but the Taliban do not. I would say that it is not entirely so black and white. I think that what is happening is that both the Republic and the Taliban negotiating team want peace. However, they want peace on totally different conditions. The Afghan government wants to maintain the Republic, and it's willing to make some amendments to it, while the Taliban, though they continue to not remain very clear, want it seems more of an emirate type of state, while the Afghan government says that we uphold Sharia, the Taliban say, no, you don't. The type of Sharia that we want to bring, the principles we want to entrench are not that. But whether the Taliban agree or not, Afghanistan's constitution is based on Sharia law, and so is the Republic, and it's an Islamic country. And the people of Afghanistan are Muslims. So what we have to do in this process is that the sequencing of what different parties want is something that we need to now negotiate, and now we have negotiations starting. They had not started as of yet. Those were just rules and procedures. So negotiations are going to start now. Here we're going to now talk about more substantive related issues, governance structures, Sharia law, look at the constitution, look at the type of political system that will come about. And these are the discussions that are going to, and then within these discussions, women's rights, minority rights, and the voices of the people. So that's when this is going to start happening. So we need to watch closely what is going to unfold in the next few months. And I think a lot of the points that were mentioned here would be very pertinent to those different junctures. But let's not by any means, and I think this is a point that has been highlighted by the Afghan negotiating team a few times, is the leverage that the public holds. The views of the public need to be brought out a lot more onto the table in Doha, and as members of civil society, it is truly our responsibility to make sure that happens. What the people of Afghanistan are feeling, and I said how they want this peace process to unfold, is a tremendous amount of leverage that has quite a determining role on where this process will ultimately move. Make no mistakes on that. I know that these voices have not yet been represented adequately on the table, but from this point onwards, when we're getting to more substantive issues, they will be incredibly important. And thus, it also highlights the importance of such events that we are now involved with today. These are important. Let's continue them. And I'd like to thank the students for once again reminding us of the work that has to be done. So I thank you very much, Ambassador.
Thank you very much, Dr. Safi. Dr. Ghosh, do I have a couple of minutes?
Yes, sir. Please.
Okay. So I think, that was an excellent summary, and I would like to take up the key point in that I think the greater the public, the Afghan people are involved in one form or the other in the peace process, it actually will strengthen the negotiating hand of the negotiating team, which is in Doha. In other words, all these concerns that have been expressed, public concerns that are very deep and very widespread. I notice, a really strong streak of apprehension among all the Afghan students about what this peace is going to bring. And as you made the point, Ms. Safi, that people are entering this discussion with different concepts of peace, very different concepts of peace, and at this point, reconciling those two different concepts of peace are going to present a very major challenge for the negotiators on both sides in Doha. So just a couple of other points that I think, I just want to quickly wrap up. This point about inclusivity. I think this was a point that came through very strongly. The point about women's rights as human rights, not as separate category of rights, but as part of, civic rights and societal rights and I was very happy to see a lot of the male representatives also, very strongly endorsing that, and I don't think there was any division there. One question there is, I think the general sense was that this peace agreement has been hasty, has been one-sided, and perhaps there's concern what might happen the day after the US withdrawal. We did not discuss the US position much, but it does not seem that there is going to be any radical revision of the decision to withdraw. What is likely to happen is some correctives, in terms of condition-based and perhaps the timeline and maybe a residual counterterrorism force that is essentially to look after American interests, not Afghan interests. So I think this one question about what Afghan people feel about the presence of US troops, because there's been considerable, there's been a little bit of disharmony on that. Some people feel that the presence of international forces is a problem and has to be addressed, and this is very much the point of view of the Taliban. But some people feel that this presence is required for some time, at least until a sustainable peace process is reached. The second question that I think was very, very important is, if there is such a lot of concern about the Taliban, about their sincerity, about their objectives, if there is concern that, as somebody mentioned, what if the peace talks fail? There is no other parallel process that is on right now. Would you be able to think of other kinds of processes? We talked about a UN-led process. Somebody mentioned about a UN mission. So that's one possibility. People have talked about regional approaches. But what if they fail? What will the Afghan people do if this process fails? The Taliban and their sponsors are certainly counting that, violence is going to create a sense of fatigue. At the end of it, the Afghan people will just accept peace at any costs. Judging from the conversation today, I didn't get that feeling. I get the feeling that the Republican side is very united on the issue of the gains of the last 20 years. And there has been no breach in that. While there have been, political pulls and pushes within the Republican side, I have not seen any compromise to this basic principle that the gains of the last 20 years must be preserved. And one point, in many ways, your generation, Afghans, post-2001 Afghans, today in a world in which democracy faces lots of threats in many parts of the world. In fact, the Afghan young generation are flag bearers of democracy. We are not only talking about Afghanistan. We're talking about flag bearers of democracy in other parts of the world where democracy is under threat. And again, I don't need to give it examples, but everywhere there are young student-led movements, sometimes leaderless movements that are coming out and expressing, a passion for freedom and a passion for having a voice in the political life of their countries. So I think this is a very big question. Ms. Shukriya also raised this whole issue of refugees, refugees who are, not just Afghans in Afghanistan, but Afghans outside. Obviously, conditions of peace should make possible their return and their contribution to the economic and political life in Afghanistan. So I think that was another very important point. And I think finally, very strong sort of commitment to that the international community should not give up on Afghanistan. And I hope that is a message that reaches out to all those people who are fatigued by 20 years of military operations and want to leave. But it's not just withdrawal of forces, because they can remain engaged politically, they can remain engaged economically, they can remain engaged in terms of trade and investment, they can remain engaged to prevent those who are spoilers and those who are enemies of peace to spoil this process. And very immediately, I think the big common and unanimous demand of the Afghan people is for a ceasefire. In the Afghan peace process, the deal, the 4 points that you mentioned, withdrawal of troops, counterterrorism guarantees, ceasefire, and a political settlement, were supposed to be one single package. What in fact has happened is that they've been made into 2 separate packages, one package with the United States and one which is an intra-Afghan process. And under the agreement, ceasefire comes at the end of this process. Effectively, you have a peace deal that allows for violence while the negotiations are taking place. In other words, negotiations take place under the shadow of the gun. So quite clearly, this is something where the international community needs to be absolutely stand together to insist on the Taliban that it's not just a question of peace at the end of the negotiations. Peace must be right through the negotiations. And if the international committee stands strong, and Taliban seem to be looking for respectability, they seem to be looking for international cooperation and assistance, the international community does have levers to be able to, if one imagines that the international community does not have the levers, even if they were planning to withdraw, the international community does have levers in terms of international assistance, cooperation, trade, respectability, recognition, and the rest of the things that go with it. So I think with those words, I want to thank all our students from India who have participated in this very rich and very enlightening discussion. I sincerely want to thank the Indian Council of World Affairs, Dr. Anwesha Ghosh, who has worked hard in programming this event, and of course the director, Ambassador TCA Raghavan, for his support, and I think for this innovative webinar that they have done. And I would like to thank also all our viewers and participants who have taken time off to hear these very important voices, because these are the voices of Afghanistan of the future. And these are the voices that will matter even for India politically. All of you, thank you very much for your support for what India has done, whether it's on the development side or on the education side. All of you, we recognize, want India to remain engaged in favor of the advances that have happened over the last 20 years. I think our Prime Minister was crystal clear on this aspect that, we are historical brothers and that we will remain with Afghanistan through thick and thin, notwithstanding the challenges that we expect in the near future. And the big question that is still left to me is, if the two sides are irreconcilable, God forbid, it's not like that. If they are irreconcilable and there is no peace agreement, there is no power sharing, what will be the outcome? What will the Afghan people do? I think a question raised by Mr. Seerat right in the beginning is, we haven't even discussed whether people want a certain kind of peace or not, and that the peace as we have defined it has been very narrow, though a lot of you have filled up what peace means in terms of women, in terms of youth, in terms of opportunities. So I think with those words, I will thank everyone and wish you all the best for the future and for your stay in India.
Thank
you. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much. I'm sure you all would agree that this has been an absolutely fascinating session. Ambassador Mukherjee has thanked everybody on my behalf, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank him for his encouragement and support. He has been very, very supportive towards this webinar, and this was important. And thank you very much, sir. I'm grateful to our distinguished speakers for joining us and for this webinar despite several issues. Extremely thankful to Afghan students for your active participation and cooperation in this entire past 2-3 months. I would like to mention the contribution of the ICWA leadership, beginning with Ambassador T.C. Raghavan, our Director General, then our Deputy Director General, Mr. Shommen Pakchi, and our Joint Secretary, Ms. Nutan Kapoor Mahavar, and her team for guiding us throughout for preparation of this webinar. I'm grateful to the research wing, especially our Director Research, Ms. Dr. Nivedita Ray, for her support. Finally, this program would not be possible without the support of the IT and the seminar section. A big shout out to them. And finally, with these words, I close my remarks and announce the end of the webinar. Thank you once again, all of you, Tashakur, Manana, for joining us.
And I hope to continue this, and it's not just a one-off event, and that you'll have more.
Yes, sir. Sure, sir. Thank you very much.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.